Hello, I'm David Lockington, Music Director of your Pasadena Symphony, and we are so excited to be presenting live music from the Ambassador for you. Hopefully soon we'll be able to gather together again in person and be bathed in the gorgeous sound of the hall. But in the meantime, we're exploring this unique virtual genre which brings other powerful qualities to our music making. We're taking advantage of this remarkable time to bring you something special that you haven't had before. We are taking you to places on stage that you can't normally see. These concerts will present a new level of intimacy that will bring you closer to the musicians. So, this is what they look like in real life. Elizabeth Hedman, Irina Voloshyna, Erin Altman, Lynn Grantz, Debbie Colgard, and Trina Carey. Of course, they'll be distanced and wearing masks, but the music and their motions will give you insight into their expertise and fabulous artistry. As with our regular concerts, I want to bring you a few insights before you hear the music tonight. Our program is Tchaikovsky's Souvenir de Florence and the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto with Simone Porter. And here are a couple of images of Tchaikovsky around the time of the writing of Souvenir de Florence, which is a confusing French title for a Russian writing inspired by an Italian town. Now, why is that? Well, despite intense feelings of nationalistic pride, the Russian aristocracy was usually bilingual, a hangover, believe it or not, from the Enlightenment 100 years before. So, what is it about Tchaikovsky? Why is he about the most popular classical composer ever? In his day, he was sometimes accused of writing almost cacophonous music that was simply too difficult to play. For example, his piano concerto was premiered in Boston to avoid possible Russian criticism, and the pianist was Hans von Bülow, Wagner's favorite conductor. But I digress. One of the clues lies in his training. You see, since the age of 11, he was destined to be a civil servant in St. Petersburg, a legal office worker. So he was taught to be very precise and organized in his thinking. But like a lot of musicians whose parents desire for their offspring a practical fallback, Tchaikovsky busted out of that mold in his early 20s and started studying harmony and counterpoint furiously at the New Conservatory in St. Petersburg. He was so obsessive, he would come up with multiple solutions for harmonizing and combining melodies. Tchaikovsky often harmonizes in such detail that the chords passing so quickly make the melodies or thematic elements sound vividly colorful. Applied to his searing melodies, it's impossible to get bored because every iteration is different in a kind of prismatic way. And then, of course, he does love to repeat. And this is another key ingredient. Like Beethoven and Wagner, Tchaikovsky knew how to develop his melodic ideas. And that's why they stick. Also, the ideas themselves are fantastically strong. Take the slow movement theme from Souvenir, for example. It's so simple, made up of stepwise motion, like a children's song or the theme from Beethoven 9. And what does he do with it? Well, in this case, he repeats it higher and higher with ever-changing accompaniments. Souvenir de Florence is a symphonic scale piece of chamber music. The 6 players, pairs of violins, violas, and cellos, create a warm, rich texture. And it's the inventiveness of his development, his discursive dialectic, that makes the piece so compelling over its long 40-minute 4-movement form. And then add into the mix his lighter, capricious side. We all know Tchaikovsky as a consummate composer for the ballet. There are several moments which will perhaps remind you of the Nutcracker and Swan Lake, and there are other balletic elements that are reminiscent of another composer from earlier in the 19th century. Now, Tchaikovsky's first love was Mozart, but we often hear a fleet-of-foot deftness, which makes me think of Mendelssohn. While a true romantic, nationalistic composer, in that he wove in Russian themes throughout his repertoire, he still employs primarily classical templates, which is part of his charm and strength. Souvenir de Florence, written late in life in 1890, when he was 50, was his last multiple movement concert work before his final Sixth Symphony. It was written just before he went to New York to help in the celebrations of the opening of Carnegie Hall. After his trip to the US, he returned to Russia to write some of his most endearing ballet music, the Nutcracker, and his most serious Pathetique symphony. Tchaikovsky spent some of his happiest times in Italy. One of the first was spent in recovery after a breakdown following his disastrous marriage to a former student of his. His 1890 three-month sojourn at the villa of his patroness, Madame von Meck, whom he never formally met at her insistence, was even more creatively rich and rewarding. As for Handel, Mozart, Mendelssohn, and many others, Italy embodied a kind of cultural luxuriousness with a climatic ease and inspired works of passion and romance. Judging from the start of this piece, Tchaikovsky's Souvenir, or Memories of Florence, or how he expressed what he brought with him, were tempestuously passionate. The first movement begins as if in the heat of an emotionally charged exchange. In the manner of a development, Schumann often did something similar, and it's uncompromisingly blunt. The lyricism of the slow movement is like an operatic duet or a pas de deux from the ballet. The third movement, intermezzo, has a Russian folk village feel. Is this a Russian in Florence? A forerunner to Gershwin's An American in Paris? Except this movement has a nostalgic seriousness about it. And the finale is vigorous, and again slightly confusing in the adoption of a Russian folk melody as the melodic building material. The second theme, however, has a breezy, carefree quality with rising gestures and flirtatious chromatic falling notes. But let's get back once again to Tchaikovsky's extraordinary compositional technique, in particular his love of counterpoint. His contemporaries didn't really approve of his Western European training. They were more geared towards Russian-themed storytelling, with elements of the fantastic coloring their orchestration. This didn't lead them to traditional forms at all. In fact, they rejected them. Tchaikovsky's control of fugal material is that of a mature master. Despite the obvious romantic harmonic genre, it reminds me of Handel or Bach or Mozart after he discovered Bach. Now I say Handel because there's almost a quote in the first movement from the Hallelujah chorus, and he shall reign forever and ever, although I'm sure it's just a coincidence. We often refer to Tchaikovsky's suffering, but this work, his ballets, and many other works simply show us the breadth of his emotional palette, reflective of a full emotional life. Mendelssohn said the E minor theme that he starts his violin concerto with haunted him incessantly, and the concerto as a whole actually pursued him for about 6 years. He got specific technical help from his virtuoso friend Ferdinand David, and perhaps he spent a long time considering the structure of the piece, which was quite unusual. While today we see Mendelssohn as a pretty straightforward, traditional composer, he did do some remarkable compositional things, gestures that even Wagner, who made relentless fun of him anonymously, copied. His first innovation is the beginning of the concerto. There's no introduction to set up the entrance of the hero soloist. Mendelssohn introduces us to his tender inner self without any flurry, almost casually, as if embarking on a non sequitur. The 18th century was inhabited by servant composers, and music was mostly designed to entertain a court or to glorify God. Generally, structures were shorter and often unrelated. As the composer in the Romantic period starts to become the central figure or even hero of his works, a process of unification begins to happen. It seems inevitable there was a need to create a kind of psychological unity to bind together longer structures. So Mendelssohn writes a concerto which leads one movement into the next. The first passionate movement subsides into one of the most lyrical slow movements in the repertoire. The bridge to the last movement is a charming recitative. full of wistful statement and reflection, before bursting into a virtuosic, sprightly gallop. Mendelssohn's prodigious talent was on a par with Mozart's. This was confirmed by the towering polymath Goethe, who said, "What your pupil already accomplishes bears the same relation to the Mozart of that time that the cultivated talk of as grown-up person does to the prattle of a child." Mendelssohn made huge contributions outside of his compositions. One was the establishment in Bach's last longtime home, Leipzig, of a groundbreaking conservatory. He hired his violinist friend, Ferdinand David, to teach and lead the city orchestra, which he conducted. Mendelssohn was a family man in a time which saw the rise of bourgeois values, and his music reflects a sense of control and order, but with an undercurrent of restrained passion. It's the tension between these elements that makes Mendelssohn's music so compelling and captivating. Incidentally, Mendelssohn, like Tchaikovsky, had a love affair with Italy. He wrote an Italian symphony, and we can see this in his own skillful draftsman-like sketches from his travels. Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto is in maybe the top 20 to 30 favorite pieces of all time. The question I asked at the beginning about Tchaikovsky's music could be posed here as well. What makes his music, and this piece in particular, so popular? In a nutshell, I think any masterwork usually has at least the following two qualities: universal transcendence combined with everlasting entertainment value. I want to thank you for tuning in tonight. Musicians always need an audience, and even though we won't see you and share this iconic space with you, we know that you're out there cheering us on. Thank you. Simone, I can't tell you how happy we are that you're back in Pasadena and performing on our new season. And so many people loved your seasons of Vivaldi. It actually was the best-selling concert we have ever had with the Pasadena.
Yeah, would never take credit for that, but I do remember how thrilling it was to play to literally the opposite of what the hall is right now. It was packed. It was lovely.
But it's so great to not only hear you play, but to play with you, and thanks for putting up with me.
Oh,
and I'm delighted that you've copied my hair color.
I know, exactly.
It's all in now.
Trying to be a collaborative musician in every sense.
I'm feeling so fashionable. But the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto, it's got to be a piece that you've been playing since you were very little.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's, like practically every violinist, it was a piece that I played for the first time when I was very, very young and have returned to many times over the last, decade and a half, which has been growing up with a piece like that. And there really is no other piece that I have revisited that has sort of been this benchmark throughout my life. Gives it such a special place in my heart. I love it distinct from my own personal history with it, but the fact that we've been through a lot of trials and tribulations together is really meaningful. I've played Mendelssohn for some of the concerts I was most nervous for. It's introduced me to people and places and ensembles. I've sort of always thought of the concerto as presenting an opportunity to almost like self-therapize, because its narrative trajectory is so distinct, so clear, and so generous. It really does travel from this angsty opening. In the first movement, it really feels like, ruminating over a problem. There's lots of just drama, there's a lot of uncertainty, and the second movement is contemplative in a completely different way. It's calm, it's searching. It's not calm, but it's it's quieter, it's more internal. And there's one moment that I think of in the second movement every single time where it goes to a high C for the second time, and that always struck me as like a moment of epiphany. It just opens up in the violin part, in the orchestra part, and it feels like the light is let in, and that leads to this joyous celebratory third movement, which Mendelssohn always proves to me that happiness can be aesthetically interesting, and I think this concerto definitely evinces that as well.
Well, tell us a little bit about the violin you're playing.
Absolutely. This is a really, really special instrument that I'm just incredibly lucky to be partnered with. It was made by Carlo Bergonzi in Italy around 1745. This violin is just something that has introduced me to absolutely new sound worlds, new expressive possibilities. I absolutely adore working with it, and it has quite an interesting story. You know, violins like this, of the stature, are tracked, of course, through history, like any great art piece. And this one was kind of buried for a little bit. It was actually mislabeled because the body was constructed by Bergonzi, but the wood was was a Stradivarius. So Bergonzi inherited Strad's shop and basically utilized all the leftover materials, and this was one of the violins he made with it. So it has different materials, different maker, and on top of that, the scroll was made by another maker, Alessandro Galliano. So I think the fact that it was, you know, this sort of symphony of parts, this sort of collective effort, made people sort of confused about its origins for a while, and it was only a few years ago that it was discovered what it actually was. But I love playing on it so much. It really challenges me in the best possible way every day.
It really is a beautiful match. I mean, it's got a sweetness, but it doesn't bottom out. You can play into it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, your signature clarity is pinpoint perfect on this instrument. It's there are no places where you think, oh, it's not going to speak well.
I love it.
It's so easy. It's fantastic. This time has been very strange. Here we are sitting with these strange masks. I mean, I know you've been well, and I know you took a little bit of time away from the violin. For me, it's been a very interesting time to reflect and to learn about myself and my relationships with the people living close around me. What has this been for you?
This definitely has been a time of reckoning with origins, with purpose, with future. I took a lot of time off from the violin. I took like 3 months off, which was probably the longest, which actually was definitely the longest I've ever taken off. And that was honestly really generative and really, really great. And it made me refreshed to come back. But during all of this, it's made me really reconsider, you know, what actually matters, what productivity is, what you actually have to offer on stage. And many of the realizations, which I've almost struggled to call them that because they're still very much in development, but a lot of it has been sort of a release from on stage, in that performing all the time, growing up in the classical music world, it's very insulated. And I think a lot of times the things that we prioritize, which is especially the quantifiable ways that we can judge, you know, playing, they become more emphasized in like our small little community. And this crisis, or, you know, the multiple intersecting crises that we've experienced in the past 6 months have shown me that like the only thing that matters is the care you can offer people, the communication that you're capable of, just how kind and how nurturing you can be, and your immediate community around you. It just made me think a lot more about playing in a way that was less focused on violinistic details and more on, you know, offering, whether it's an escape or, you know, a moment of beauty or something like that. And I think I also used to be a little bit more dismissive. You know, I wanted a concert to offer something really, really profound, and I didn't. When people were like, "Oh, it's, you know, a great thing to take your mind off something," I didn't necessarily see it as profound as I do now. Like, what could be more meaningful than, you know, an escape or just like a balm for an hour, 2 hours or something? That means a lot. That means a lot. I think I was chatting with you right before we were having this interview, and I said that this last 6 months have given me whiplash. And that was something I felt even a little bit before, especially existing as like a millennial Gen Zer whose brain has been absolutely fried by the attention economy and social media. But I really look forward to performing in and attending concerts because of their duration, which is something that I know classical music is often sort of, it's seen as a problem. But the opportunity to have like sustained attention in a crowd has seemed like the ultimate antidote, honestly, to me of late. And now it's even more interesting because we are not achieving this inner sympathy all in the same space, but allowing the interior of here, Ambassador Auditorium, to coalesce with everyone else's private spaces. So it's a new kind of experiment. Everything is up in the air. I told you also I gave up on long-term planning, and I'm very, very interested. Slash, feeling very trepidatious, but interested is as a broad word to see what comes next.
Well, I think I have taken a lot for granted, and when you don't have something for the taking right in front of you, you do savor it all the more. And I've always had this feeling about making music that in some sense one should play as if it's the last time you play. That's what you can bring, your deepest sort of soul yearning or desire, and that's when you're bringing your greatest authenticity to the music making. And I think when people in the audience hear that, and that exchange of energy takes place between the stage and the audience, then I think we touch universals, and the heartstrings, bring that healing sort of salve. I'm saying the same thing that you're saying.
No, absolutely.
But it's made it more profound and more special for me. So I'm thrilled that we've got our musicians on stage performing some of the most glorious music.
Absolutely.
That you are a part of this program. We've got 3 more concerts coming up in the next few weeks. And I know that our audience is really desirous to hear us live again. But in the meantime, I think they're going to be blown away by the camera work. I've never seen.
Oh yeah, it's up close and personal. Well,
how does that feel when you're playing and suddenly you've got a swarm of cameras going around you?
I think you master tunnel vision in any context, and it's kind of the same here. But honestly, I'm also so I applaud you for making live music happen and being able to be shared, and I'm so grateful to be included in it. Ambassador Auditorium, Pasadena Symphony are absolutely a home to me, and being back in a place that I grew up in. I played on this stage as a soloist and in orchestra when I was in school at Colburn many times. So it feels right. It feels like a homecoming, and is just extraordinarily lovely and invigorating. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Simone.